on live stream, hello as well. Let's, everybody in New York, wave to all the people out there, back there. You have to kind of turn around. And to those of you in Houston, particularly our love tonight. I know that you're feeling it from people all over the world, and certainly it comes from us. Let us begin tonight. Introduce yourselves, please, to the people who are around you, to your right and to your left, and in front of you and behind you. All right. Now, please join with me. Let's all take a deep breath. Close our eyes. We see in the middle of our mind a little ball of golden light, and we watch this light as it begins to grow larger and larger, until now it covers the entire inner vision of our mind. And we see for ourselves within this light a beautiful temple. We see a garden that surrounds the temple and a body of water that flows through the garden. We see that the inside of the temple is lit as well by this same beautiful golden light. And here we are, for we have been drawn together by the power and in the presence of God. We devote our time spent together, all of our relationships and experiences of one another, to Him. And we pray that His most Holy Spirit be upon us, lifting us above, beyond the turmoil, the despair, and the pain of this world to the endless love and peace that lay beyond. And so it is. Together, we all say, Amen. All of us are aware of the extraordinary catastrophe that has befallen my hometown. I was born and raised in Houston. My mother was born and raised in Houston. Her father came here to New York and sold bananas on the Lower East Side of New York, somewhere around 1900, the late 1800s. And there was a distant relative who had some land in Texas. And that's where my family ended up settling, where my mother was born and so forth. When I was growing up, Houston was a small city. It is now the fourth largest city in the United States. And we have all seen on television, you can't avoid it, and online, the extraordinary images, what is happening there. And as I said before, to those of you watching from Texas and also some of the surrounding states that are affected by the floods, Louisiana and so forth, all of our love and our best wishes. This is an absolute catastrophe in human terms. For those of you in Houston, I remember when I was growing up, that entire area between Kirby and Buffalo Speedway, there below Bel Air Boulevard, it used to be huge green spaces. And when you live in a state like Texas, and this is true in a lot of the southern states as well, the ecosystem, the natural ecosystem is, or at least was for a very long time, for many, many years, threaded in to the social life of a city in a way that often it is not. The reason these huge green spaces were so important is because they absorb the water during flood times. These kinds of floods, hurricanes, tropical storms are natural enough. That is true. They are what is often called acts of God. They are part of the natural ecosystem. But when you look at something like what is happening now with Hurricane Harvey, there is more than an act of God that is involved here. When you talk about the eradication of those green spaces, you're talking about a disrespect and an irreverence shown towards the environment on a level that we're all being forced to reckon with right now. When you talk about our environmental policies, when you talk about the absolute evidence, scientific evidence, that it is human behavior that has contributed to the rising temperatures in the waters of the Gulf of Mexico, more moisture in the air contributing to these hurricanes. When you say hurricanes have always been in Texas, of course, we have hurricanes. I grew up, I know from Hurricane Carla, my mother's house, the house I grew up in, was destroyed during the storm, Tropical Storm Allison in 2001. But we are now dealing with a different order of reality. And it is time for us to understand and to dwell within this moment in a way that not only enables us to navigate this moment most effectively for the victims who are involved now, in terms of all the feelings that are coming up for us, but in order so that we can work the miracles necessary to change, to transform, to transmute these conditions. You know, one of the things that we've been talking about here quite a bit, and that my book, Tears to Triumph is very much of all of this, because we have been brought up in under the aegis of a psychotherapeutic paradigm, which has been around for over 100 years and very much points to issues of psychological and emotional health in terms of an individual's circumstances. You go to therapy, what's going on in your life? Why are you upset? We have lost the sense that many of the things that upset us personally are things that we are going through together. And so we have many things going on now that are collective stress points that are affecting us on personal levels. Things like monster weather phenomenon, freak storms like this. This is not just something Houston is going through. This is something that any intelligent person realizes is exactly what has been predicted. And it is exactly not only what scientists told us was coming, it is what scientists tell us to expect more of, given how little we have done and how little relatively we are doing to deal with the situation now. I know my friends and family in Houston know this, and I think it's something for all of us to think about, as difficult as it is to do. Houston's tough. Texans are tough. I know what Texans are made of. I know that Houston will get through this, but all of us have to be realistic about this. How many storms like this could any city take? How many do you think you could have like this? A storm like this used to be, anything even near this was considered something that would happen maybe every 100 years. So you have hurricanes, you have tropical storms that happen fairly often. You have tropical storms and hurricanes on this order of reality happening fairly often. A city literally cannot take it. That's what the word unsustainable means, ladies and gentlemen. And the same thing is going on in other areas of our existence. The same thing is going on in our political system. The fact that so many levees have not held. It's a perfect imagery. It's the levees that's not held in terms of the protection of some of our democratic institutions. Look at what's happening. We're all looking. You know, you read this stuff, you can hardly believe what you're reading, what's going on in North Korea and so forth. So one of the topics we've also talked about, that my book Tears to Triumph has been about, is how we have developed on top of all that. We've developed over the last few years and decades this kind of avoidance of sadness, which is unfortunate, because if we have thrown a cheap yellow smiley face over everything, like be happy, be happy, be happy, be happy, then what that means is that we lose the emotional musculature that we need when times are not happy. And it's important to know how to navigate sadness. It's important to know how to navigate times when really rough things are occurring. If your heart is open to what is occurring in Houston right now, there's human suffering. I mean, when I look at some of those pictures, and especially, like I said, because I grew up there, I know those houses, I know those buildings, and I look how high the water is, and I know how much lower it was to completely destroy my mother's house. So the level of destruction here is so enormous. But then to actually face how much of this is unnecessary, ladies and gentlemen. How much of this is unnecessary. So much of this is a product of our complete irreverence as a species. And where does this irreverence come from? It comes from idolatry. It comes from whoredom. It comes from the fact that we have made economics so much more important than humanitarian concern. Why is it that those green spaces were eradicated? They were eradicated because building occurred there. I read on Facebook one post today that said, the engineers and urban planners forgot. No, the engineers and urban planners did not forget. They were overruled. This is very important. It's not that people are stupid. It's not that environmentalists haven't known this. It's not that social planners haven't known this. It's not that urban planners have not known this. It's not that they haven't known that you can just take so much. If you get rid of your green spaces, the ground cannot absorb this water. They were overruled. They were overruled by a mentality that we have all been conned by for decades now. Pro-business. Pro-business, let's get these regulations out of the way. Let's get these regulations out of the way so we can get these job creators in there. What do you think these regulations are? These are environmental regulations. These are safety regulations for workers. These are regulations that protect the earth and protect the health and the well-being of people and other species. And we have been conned by this. And not only have we been conned by this, but huge amounts of money have gone towards the con. So that at this point, this kind of anti-intellectualism is becoming almost vogue in America, not to even listen to the scientists. Well, you can believe that all you want, but whether you believe smoking is bad for your health or not, smoking is bad for your health. Whether you want to believe it or not, smoking is bad for your health. So what we are taught in the Course in Miracles is that everything is ruled by a law of cause and effect. Here's a cause, here's an effect. God created this law for our protection. And God himself will not violate his own laws. Now, these causes are sometimes what I've caused in my individual life, but sometimes these causes are collective. And that is why we must take our recognition of spiritual principle to an expanded place where we are not only applying it to our own personal circumstances, but we're applying it to our collective circumstances as well. Individual compassion is not enough, ladies and gentlemen. We must become more compassionate as a species. Individual acts of charity and mercy are not enough. No amount of private charity can compensate for basic lack of social justice. We've got too many of the resources of goodness and consideration and compassion applied to too small a group of people in this country and on this planet. This is unsustainable. Unsustainable has too many soft letters in it. It has too many vowels in it. It doesn't sound ugly enough. Unsustainable means unsustainable, means at a certain point the whole thing bursts. And if you look at what's happening in Houston, like I said, imagine this happening again in just a few years. That's called unsustainable. At a certain point, you had, let's say, 3 or 4 of these over a decade. It is time for us to consider these. It is time for us to be grown-ups. It is time for us to be mature. Now, the Course in Miracles says God himself will not violate the law of cause and effect. We are free. Free will means you can think whatever you want to think, and therefore do whatever you want to do. But the Course in Miracles also says that there is a limit beyond which the Son of God cannot miscreate. What is miscreation? Lovelessness. Lack of environmental reverence is lovelessness. Lack of consideration of the social and environmental impact of things that we do in business and elsewhere, that is an irreverence. It is a mockery of life. And the Course in Miracles says that the line in the Bible, God shall not be mocked, means, oh, he isn't. We saw this several years ago with Mount Everest and these extraordinary things. There were just so many of those like cool, hip, chic tourist trips before Mount Everest showed who was boss. And we're seeing the same thing now. Nature, and environmentalists have been telling us this, nature will take only so much from us. Nature will take only so much abuse, and then they'll start kicking us off. Ha, 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 ha. And if we abuse it enough, if we get irresponsible around things like nuclear bombs, it just might have to throw us off for 250,000 years. This is New York. You had 9/11 here in New York. There are so many people, no matter where we live, no matter what our circumstances, enough of us have had enough of a taste of real catastrophe in our lives that we can now expand to take in the enormity of this moment. And the only way that we can transmute the enormous challenges of this moment is if we inhabit it with the enormity of our true selves. But the enormity of our true selves is not just in reaction to what is happening. The enormity of our true selves is in mastery. And we are only in mastery when we are willing to learn what we need to learn, be willing to change in places that we need to change. God himself will not save us, the Course in Miracles says, from the effects that we ourselves caused. But if you ask God's help, then the Course in Miracles says the Holy Spirit will work with us on the level of cause. And when we are willing to change on the level of cause, that means taking responsibility for the part of these messes that are ours. When we have talked before about our own political situation here in the United States, many things that many people are unhappy with, but if we're honest with ourselves as a generation, too many of us disengage from the political process. Too many of us, if we're honest with ourselves, have not lived our lives, including in all the things that we want to be about, deep, conscious citizenship, how we might contribute, not only how we're going to vote, but how we are going to be active in our communities, in our country, to make sure that we take this precious gift of American democracy that has been bequeathed to us and be responsible for it. We have conspired passively. We have allowed the emergence of the military, the prison industrial complex, mass incarceration. We have acquiesced to too much of the dismantling of our democratic principles and our democratic institutions. And so when we go through periods of deep darkness and deep despair, the reason they're so painful is because of the things we have to look at. That's why I have such a thing about the misuse, the overuse, the overprescription of antidepressants. Because I know what has happened in the periods of my deep darkness. I know what has happened in the periods of my dark nights of the soul. I know what has happened during those times when I could not sleep and I was so depressed. One of the reasons I was so depressed was because the things I had to think about that were so painful to think about, and they were not all things that other people had done to me. Much of it was what I had been stupid enough to do to myself. And it's painful. And of course you can't sleep. And the last thing you should be doing is taking a sleeping pill for every night that this is happening. You're awake at night because during the day you're able to distract yourself from these things. The last thing we need to be doing right now is distracting ourselves from the messages that nature is giving us. The last thing that we need to be doing right now is distracting ourselves from what are very serious problems in our midst. This is not like a little bit is wrong. We all know the story that, God knocks and we listen or we don't, and then God knocks louder. The universe knocks louder and we listen or we don't. The universe will knock as loud as it needs to knock to get our attention. And there is a limit beyond which we cannot miscreate. We have taken so much for granted. We take the environment for granted. We take American democracy for granted. We take it for granted that things can't, no matter what happens, worst comes to worst, the military will handle it. Well, hello, how's the military going to handle what's happening in North Korea right now? Almost any military option you can think about would probably kill 30 million people or so in South Korea and other places around there in the first 30 minutes. We are up against it now, and grown-ups don't pretend we're not. We believe in miracles, but miracles don't happen because we look the other way. Miracles happen through us. We've all heard the line, well, maybe we haven't all heard it, but there is a line. It's not from the Course in Miracles. It's sort of a traditional line, and I think in Christianity, God cannot do for us what he cannot do through us. So we can't say, oh, God, please handle this environmental stuff. We can't just say, oh, dear God, please handle what's happening in our political system. We can't say, oh, dear God, please just handle what's happening internationally. It's not just a moment, and the Course in Miracles talks about this. It's not just a moment of saying, dear God, oh God, when are you going to do something? It's a time when God is saying, when are you going to do something? When are you? How long, oh Lord, is the line in the Bible. How long, oh Lord, how long? And the Course in Miracles says God is going, how long, oh Son, how long? How long? Now, this is the thing. We are allowing so much of this to happen, and we have allowed, and we have conspired, passively at least, in so much of this, because we have been convinced that we are powerless. That is how the ego operates. The ego is the idea that you're just one little small person, and here's the big, what can I possibly do to affect change? I remember years ago when I first saw that beautiful little sign, my boat is so small and the sea is so big. And I remember thinking it was so beautiful. It's nonsense. And the reason it's nonsense is because you are not the little boat, you are the sea. The Course in Miracles says, you are asking for the wings of a sparrow when the wings of an eagle have already been given you. We have the power to miraculously change all this, ladies and gentlemen. We have the power. before it is too late in human terms. We have the power to save our environment, we have the power to save our democracy, and we have the power to emerge from this trajectory of almost inevitable global catastrophe in terms of warfare. We can, but only if we are willing to choose again. That's what the Course in Miracles says. That's the message of the Course in Miracles, is choose again. Be willing to change. And the Course in Miracles says, and we're seeing this collectively as much as we often see it individually, the Course in Miracles says, some people would rather die than change their mind. And that's how we're acting. We're acting like we'd rather die than change our mind. We'd rather die than actually come to recognize what is true from any rational perspective, and that is that the ordering of our civilization according to economic rather than humanitarian laws is killing us. It is killing our democracy. It is killing our environment. It is killing any commitment to justice. It is killing people. When you have a world in which, although there is no dearth of food, but 12,000 children starve every day, who are we? Who are we as people? Is it because there's simply no food? No, there's food. That's not what's going on here. What's going on here is that when all the rich nations of the world, not just America, other advanced democracies and other wealthy nations as well, get together for all their fancy meetings, their G8 meetings, their G20 meetings, their Davos meetings, it's simply not on the agenda to cure global poverty. Could happen, they could do it. It would be relatively easy, but it wouldn't be a good political choice at home. Because we're living at a time where if a politician stood up in the United States and in many countries and said, well, I think one of the things we want to deal with mainly is making sure we eradicate global poverty, it would be considered politically suicidal. Even here in the United States, during the 1960s, President Lyndon Johnson had a war on poverty. Today, that would be considered almost impossible because somehow we have exalted mean-spiritedness. We have been so conned by this demonization of the poor, by this demonization of anybody that's not just soaring. And it's not like making money is bad. Making money is good. You know, there's nothing holy about what happens when money stops circulating. And when you are in the club, and you have given me the opportunity to be in the club by buying my books, if you have something where you are able to create a product, do something of value, the energy comes back to you in the form of money, money's made, this is a beautiful thing. I'm not putting down that club. Free market economy, and when it works, is a beautiful thing. Not enough people today can get into the club. That's what the problem is in America today. Too many people can't get in. Too many people are living in economic despair. Too many people are living in economic despair in this country, and people are living around the world, and in certain parts of the world, and way beyond economic despair, are living in starvation, unsustainable. So whether it has to do with the way we're treating the environment, it's all the same ego problem. It's all lack of love. It's all desensitization to human suffering. That's what all of it is. And you know, this whole idea, you know, when you look at these young people and their terrible, the burden of all these college loans, these kids would love to get in there. They want to be capitalists. They want to be entrepreneurs. They wish they had $2,500 to discretionary spending to build their websites and do what they want to get in. People want to get in. People want to soar. People want to fly. People want to create. People want to manifest. But when you make everything so hard because everybody's living in despair, because they don't have health care and they can't pay their college loans, then people can't fly. And so there's a breakdown emotionally. And then what happens is that the more poverty there is, the more incidents of domestic violence. The more people aren't taking care of their kids. And then all this feeds in. We now have a system where the private prison industry can actually look at a fourth grader and know that if that fourth grader isn't making it in school, go on and build a bed, because that's where they're going to end up. And the racial inequalities that are part of all that formula are particularly obscene. Now, the ego mind has many ways to deal with this. First of all, the ego mind is what created this. The Course in Miracles says the ego is suspicious at best and vicious at worst. So it's no different whether you're talking about how you blew it in an intimate relationship or you're talking about how your country is blowing it. It's all the same thing. It's that same force of consciousness which puts anything before love. One of the lines in the Course in Miracles that is particularly powerful is it says, your problem is not that you do not believe in love. It is that you do not believe in love only. We are really good with convenient love. We're really good with easy love, and our crowd particularly loves it if it's personal love. But personal love is not enough. It's not just about whether or not I be loved, whether I can attract love. It's bigger than that. It's the agape love. The love that will save the world is not just love for our own children. It's love for children on the other side of town. That's what we need to become as a species. We need to become as a species to a place where the very thought of what people are going through in Houston pierces us. You know, we've had those moments. We had here in New York, in the aftermath of 9/11. And also, you saw it here in New York, and you're seeing it in Houston right now, the miracles that happen. People are awake to what matters, helping each other. They say in AA, every problem comes bearing its own solution. You know, if we were as loving towards each other before catastrophes as we are after catastrophes, there would not be so many catastrophes. I'm going to repeat that. If we were as loving to each other before catastrophes as we are after catastrophes, there would not be so many catastrophes. And so we become distracted. We close our hearts. Now there's so many ways to buffer ourselves from the pain, pharmaceutical and otherwise. And then we go into this place where even if we feel the pain, we pretend that we are powerless. And when I say we pretend that we are powerless, I'm saying that to those of us who live in democratic societies where we are not powerless, where we have simply not been exerting our power. That's why things like the 2018 midterm elections matter. You can't see politics as separate from this. People say, oh, you have a political agenda. Yeah, it's called democracy. I think all of us should have that political agenda and should not apologize. There is no area of life where we are not to apply these principles. It's not like, here's your spirituality, here's your love life, here's money and career, here's your body and health, and here's politics. No, spirituality is the underpinning of everything. It is the platform on which we stand. So if you're going to stand for love anywhere, then you must stand for love everywhere. And if we don't stand for love everywhere, we are infantilized. And too much of the higher consciousness community has conveniently sat within a bubble where it's really just a conversation about ourselves. A conversation that is just about yourself is not really a conversation about yourself. The Course in Miracles says, do not look to yourself to find yourself, for that is not where you are. None of us are separate. We just believe that we are separate. So when we go on about our life experiences and our life problems, only talking about our own life problems, we're actually fostering the problem and perpetuating the problem, because the problem is the belief that we're separate. So it is when we realize that the main challenges of our time are not personal. The main challenges of our time are collective. I mean, the woman I know who died in 9/11, and I'm sure there are people in this room and watching who feel the same way about people that you've known. The woman I know who died on one of those planes, if you were to say to me, give me 5 people, one hand, Marianne, the sweetest people you've ever known, the most compassionate people you've ever known, the most giving people you've ever known, I would make Barry Berenson one of those people. She was standing there. This isn't about just what you create. It's also about what we create. And for us to move into that conversation, move into the place where the biggest question now is not just about you. It's like when I heard that I read an article in Los Angeles about psychiatrists talking about, and psychologists talking about Trump trauma. People going to therapy to talk about Trump trauma. That kind of mentality is what created all this. It's not just about you. It's not about you. I can't tell you how many things in my life, problems I solve when I just remember, Marianne, it's not about you. And that is when you are individually glorified. You are individually glorified in those moments where you're not even thinking about yourself. And those are the miracles that are happening right now in Houston. I mean, you know that those miracles are happening. You saw those things happening after 9/11. Because these tragedies remind us of that. They take us to that place where we need to be. We are applying, in the 21st century, a mental filter that is a product of the 20th century. It is a product of the Industrial Revolution. It is a product of Newtonian physics, where basically we just see things on the outside and we look at the outer world as a kind of machine, and we think we can just tinker with the machine, tinker with the parts, until all we can do at best is just water the leaves. We're not watering the roots. Watering the roots means that we go deep with our conversation, and that means that we atone. When I've been in periods of my life, when I've been very, deep depression in my own life, and I had to look at some things, remember, the Course in Miracles tells us, you pay a very high price for not taking 100% responsibility for your life experience. That price you pay is that you then will not be able to change your life experience. So we can look at these storms and say, oh, storms always happen. Yes, storms always happen. They don't always happen like this. They don't always happen like this. We can refuse to look at that, or we can look at it and atone for it. And sometimes you atone on behalf of the collective. It's like people say, well, my grandparents didn't own slaves. That's not the point. You are owning something on behalf of the entire karmic identity of a group as well. That's why a nation atones. The German nation atoned after the Holocaust. And yes, there were many Germans who hid Jews in their basement. It was not every German. But that's not the point. The point is a national identity, that the people who are part of a national identity take responsibility for it. And part of what's happened is, well, I don't have anything to do with the prison industrial complex. I don't have anything to do with mass incarceration. I don't have anything to do with racial disparities in sentencing. I don't have anything to do with what's happening in the criminal justice system. I don't have anything to do. It's all that. This is what keeps us small. I remember when people would ask me about the Course in Miracles, do you have any advice about reading it? I would always say, take it personally. Take this country personally. It belongs to you. And people there are very real forces that have worked very hard to get you to the point where you don't think that way. It's a giant con. That's what the ego is. Everybody, anybody with any familiarity with AA knows, they'll talk about sick thinking, stinking thinking. It's our thinking. The Course in Miracles says salvation begins when you consider the possibility there might be another way. And the only thing to be saved from is our own sick thinking. And our sick thinking will kill us if we do not change our minds. The Course in Miracles says that your greatest power to change the world lies in your power to change your mind about the world. There is only one purpose to the world, the Course in Miracles says, and that is the healing of God's Son. That is the purpose of the world. That is the purpose of our individual lives. That is the purpose of our collective existence. And until we move into that, we are not moving into the only mindset that is actually a survivable option for the 21st century. Talk about absence of long-term thinking. We don't even go there, because we know in our hearts that if we actually do, we know that if we continue the way we are, we're going to lose these things that are most precious. This world is so precious. The planet is so precious. The building, the architecture, the art, the relationships, the babies, the music. What are we doing? Why are we behaving so recklessly? Why are we behaving so irresponsibly? Oh, I know why, because it's somebody else's issue. We're just trying to make it. And by the way, the fact that so many people have a hard time just making it is actually part of the plan to make sure that you don't have the bandwidth to complain. Complain anyway. Complain anyway. Do something about it anyway. It's like when you see pictures of countries in which people get to vote for the first time. And you will see lines miles long. miles long, people getting to vote for the first time. Here, it's like we can't be bothered. And in the 2018 congressional elections, we will see the results of all the voter suppression issues, all the voter suppression efforts being made as we speak, state after state, and even now on a federal level. And there will be all kinds of ways that it will just be sort of made inconvenient for you. You think it's an accident? That it's like, sometimes I think, I'm a pretty smart person. I can't figure out where I'm supposed to vote. Why is it so complicated? You think that's an accident? That is not an accident. So I'm a person who can own my own schedule, can own my own schedule, I have a nice life, and I know how sometimes it's oddly and weirdly inconvenient for me. So I think, well, what is that? Of course, these things are not an accident. All these voter ID laws, open your eyes, this is not an accident. But we should be prepared. We should be prepared for this in advance. Because the fact that so many of the best and the brightest, and that means each and every one of us in this country, they just make it a little harder and harder and harder. Just a little harder. And then the food is more corrupted, and the food is more filled with all the things that make brain fog, and all these kinds of things. There's just so many ways having to do with the stuff in the food, and the stuff in the air, and the stuff in the ground, and the stuff in the pensions, and the stuff in the making it economically harder, and getting health care, and how it's so hard, and how it's so expensive. It just wears us down, and wears us down, and wears us down. Because we are not living in a place where the whole purpose of our society is predicated on the idea that anything we can do to make it easier for people to soar is what we should be doing. And that is why we should have free preschool, and why we should have free college, and why we should have free health care. Why? Because economic despair limits who people can be. And when we are able to be who we want to be, we are good people, and we are compassionate people, and we are decent people. But what's happening now is people are just, I'm doing everything I can just to survive. I'm doing everything I can just to make it. So you can't ask me to think about all that. That was the plan. I'm sorry, the ego is very smart. And the collective ego, works in the same way that the individual ego works. It's our own thinking used against ourselves. So it's not even about who is the individual to look at. There are individuals who embody it, and the idea of making sure that they are not in charge of, Congress and the White House is important. But still, it's more than that. None of this would have even been able to happen were it not for the fact that too many of us allowed ourselves to be taken away from the central mission and the central purpose and the central thoughts about what it means to be human. We talk so much about our relationships to each other, and that's everything the Course in Miracles says. But the larger relationship is to the universe itself. The larger relationship is to God. The larger relationship is to a sense of what it means to be human and what good can I do. And that if we really look at how this is all going down here, and how we are allowing short-term economic concern for just basically a handful of huge multinational corporate forces to just suck the energy, the life force out of Western civilization and even global civilization. And it's not even that all the people who work for those entities are bad people. It's not even about that. It's systems. This is not about demonizing. Martin Luther King talked about that. Not about demonizing individuals. It is about recognizing evil systems. And for us to be naive about this, why would you not be naive about addiction, not be naive about drug addiction, not be naive about alcoholism, not be naive about domestic abuse, not be naive about cancer or AIDS? What is it with us? Well, we don't have a problem knowing, well, that'll kill you, that'll kill you, that'll kill you, that'll kill you. But then when it comes, that'll kill you, oh, let's not be negative. What are we talking about? Well, all of a sudden we go, oh, let's not be negative, let's not be divisive. Sometimes the person who loves you is the one who just tells you the truth. And we need to speak truth to each other right now. And we've talked about this so many times. This is not the first time that our country or Western civilization or human civilization has had some very serious challenges. And we are the descendants of people who've stood up to those. In our country alone, slavery was met with abolition. The fact that women couldn't even vote was met by the women's suffrage movement. Institutionalized white supremacy and segregation was met by the civil rights movement. So it's not like we're the first generation to be confronted by forces that violated and transgressed against the very principles on which we purport to stand. But let us not be the first generation to wimp out on the job of doing what is necessary to make things right. And the problem we have is that these forces are not, I don't think you can say the forces are bigger, because how much bigger can you get than an economic system based on the slavery of millions of people that lasted over 200 years? It's not that those forces are bigger, it's that the influence is ubiquitous. And it's not as obvious, because it's not like one thing, one group of people that becomes almost like an operable tumor. Slavery was like an operable tumor. You remove it, you abolish it. But as we've talked about, slavery is a perfect example. We remedied on an institutional level through the 13th Amendment, through the Civil War, through the Emancipation Proclamation. But just eradicating slavery doesn't eradicate racism. Just giving women the right to vote or no longer burning women at the stake does not eradicate this misogynistic projection of suspicion onto any powerful woman who speaks her mind. So the depth work that we do is very relevant to the collective experiences of this moment. And that's why we have so much to contribute. Those of us who are doing that depth work, those of us who know that it's all about a healing of the mind, whatever took you there, whether it was the Course in Miracles or psychotherapy or AA or whatever, higher consciousness, Buddhism, whatever, we are the last ones who should be sitting this out. Because we're withholding our gifts when we sit it out. Because we have a sense of the deep, deep darkness. You know, there are people who are part of the sort of traditional problem-solving sets in America, political and otherwise, who look at those of us who are into this depth psychology, spirituality stuff, they think we're naive. You want to know the real truth? They're naive. They're naive to think they can just keep watering the leaves. We are not naive. We just need to apply the deeper wisdom that we study and that we seek in our own individual lives. We need to be willing to apply it in a more expanded way to the larger society and the world in which we live. Now, what does that mean behaviorally for your life? I don't know. None of my business. I don't wake up in the morning with God telling me what you should do. But I do know, as a Course in Miracles student and as a person who tries my best to practice these principles, that He has plenty to say to me about what I should do. Because the Course in Miracles says each of us is imbued with the voice for God. And there is a line in both Christianity and Judaism, the small, still voice for God. The problem is not that we do not have the small, still voice within. The problem is that we are not practiced at listening. It's our inner ears need to be open. So we live in a society, the Course in Miracles says the ego speaks first and the ego speaks loudest. So it's always yelling at us. And if you wake up in the morning and you go just right to the voices of the world, electronically or a newspaper, you download that mindset. That's why, as the Dalai Lama said, in order to save the world, we must have a plan, but no plan will work unless we meditate. So whether your meditation practice is the workbook of the Course in Miracles or any other, but it's not just walking through the woods, and it's not just lighting a candle. It's not. There's a deeper work that's going on here. The work not only of the quieting of the mind, but then doing what we're told to do, where we have to atone. As President Lincoln said, we must atone for and confess our national sins. Just as he said, we must atone for and confess our personal sins. We don't talk in quite that language, but the point is the same. We need to humble ourselves. He says, we have grown in strength, in financial power, Lincoln said, but we have forgotten God. We have forgotten to be humble. We have become so arrogant. And the Western mind has become so arrogant. And we, as individuals, have been too easily played, too easily conned. And that system is able to, that collective ego is able to do what it does because it's just weighed us down in too many cases, made life just a little bit too hard. But you know what? For those of us, most of us, certainly those of us living here, and who would even be watching this tonight, except perhaps those of you in Houston. For most of us who would be here or watching this tonight, we don't even know what hard is. And a lot of the hard that people experience on this planet that is so much greater than any of the hardships we know, if we are honest with ourselves, is at least indirectly due to policies that are promulgated with our own tax dollars. It's sickening to think about it, but we right now need to be sickened. And that's where the change will come from. It's a change inside our own hearts, where we are willing to atone and we are willing to say, dear God, use me. And every cell in the body has a natural intelligence that tells it where to go and what to do. Each and every one of us has a natural intelligence. You'll be told where to go, you'll be told what to do. You'll be told where to be, you'll be told what to say and to whom. And you know what? While all that's happening, you won't be thinking anymore about, I got to do my work first, I got to do my trauma work first, and then I'll show up. You show up, and guess what? The trauma was due to the fact that you weren't showing up. I remember the time in my life when I was so depressed, and an old friend said to me, Marianne, I don't mean to, be rude or anything, but do you ever do anything for anybody else? I was in my early 20s. It was like a brick to my forehead. We're traumatized by the fact that we feel isolated. But you feel isolated until you reach out. And sometimes it's just that person in front of you, that one person who's in trouble, a friend who has been diagnosed with an illness. Sometimes it's on the big collective level, but sometimes it's on a small individual level. But there is no small or big in that quantum field. We are all invited and we are all challenged to contribute now to a resurrective field of possibility. This entire world has been crucified. The entire human race has been crucified by ourselves right now. And it's time to invoke the resurrection, atoning for our own mistakes, forgiving other people for theirs, and showing up. Not fighting the good fight, but standing for something. If you don't stand for something, you can easily be knocked down. That's true as an individual and as a nation. We need to stand for our principles now. Our principles of living in integrity, living in compassion, living in generosity, living in love, and not apologizing for it. And being willing to stand for justice and being willing to stand for all that is good and true and beautiful. Because if people don't stand for it, you think these things are just going to support themselves? There's nothing in history to indicate that that is the case. Any time that any civilization has been saved from the clutches of its own self-destructiveness or the destructiveness of others, it was because of individuals who stood up. And those individuals didn't have any more going on for them than we have going on for us. They weren't any less tired than we are, and more tired than we are. They weren't less tired. They weren't any less traumatized. You think the abolitionists were not traumatized by slavery? You think the women suffragettes were not traumatized? You think the civil rights workers were not traumatized? Of course they were. You can't wait till you have it all together before you show up for God. Show up for God now, and amazing things are going to happen. All of a sudden you're going to look around and go, I think I have it all together. That's how it happens. And that's, though, how it has to happen now on a massive level. This needs to be a revolution of consciousness, unlike anything we have seen in a very, very long time, because the hour is late and the forces are great. But the forces of darkness are nothing compared to the forces of light. The forces of darkness are downloaded. They are not mysterious. They are downloaded. They are greed. They are insensitivity. They are lack of compassion and heartlessness. The forces of light can be downloaded as well. But they have been downloaded in little trickles, and they've been downloaded personally. We got to download compassion collectively. We need to see compassion and justice as the point, as the mission, not only of our individual lives, but of our collective experience as well. And then we will see on this planet, we will see in this country, and we will see on this planet, something the likes of which I don't think has ever been seen before. The Course in Miracles says that we have been asleep. We have been living a nightmare for a very, very long time. There has been no mass awakening, but it is time for us to initiate a mass awakening right now. If you're a student of the Course in Miracles, the book says that's what this is all about, a mass awakening. And as we are awakened to what our actual purpose is and the fact that in God all things are possible, that there is nothing our holiness cannot do, that when we sign up as an instrument and ask God to use us, then miracles occur naturally. And we are led to each other and those who collaborate together, and we find ourselves all part of a great resurrective field of new possibility. That is what we need. The world is weary, the Course in Miracles says. The world is weary, but this can all change. But it's not going to change unless we are willing to be the change agents. We are willing to be the miracle workers. The very fact that you would be here tonight, the very fact that you would be listening, means that something in you is already in a yes zone, because subconsciously you knew what you were going to hear before you came here tonight. So let us strengthen each other. Let us not spend so much time coddling our neuroses. Let us not spend so much time coddling each other's neuroses. You know what? There's time to cry, but there are a lot of hours in the day. There are times that we cry, times you own your sadness, times you own your pain, and then times when we get up and do, what do? We kick ass. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Love you too, Howard. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, now, in our meditation tonight, one of the things that we've already talked about is each of us has the voice for God, but we're not practiced at listening. The Holy Spirit works through your subconscious mind. The Course in Miracles says all of us are special and none of us are special. The Course in Miracles says that those who have achieved the most have achieved a fraction of what each of us is capable of. Your subconscious mind has so much to tell you, but it's that small, still voice that sometimes doesn't get listened to. One of the reasons why it's beneficial to attend congregational things like this, support groups, meetings, etc., is because when you're in a room or joined by, electronically with people who are thinking a higher frequency of thought, it's very difficult to lie to yourself and much easier to hear more clearly what your own inner self is trying to say and what God is trying to say to you. So let's join together now and surrender ourselves to God. God, we don't want to get together now just to tell you what we want. That's not our purpose here. Rather, dear Lord, we ask what you want from us. On this night, we dedicate and rededicate our lives, that we might be of greater use, of greater service. And we ask you, dear God, to pour forth your Spirit upon us, to open our eyes that we might see and to open our ears that we might hear. May the voice for God direct us. Each of us now opening ourselves to receive the Spirit of God, the guidance, the instruction, and the illumination by which we shall be lifted. Feel the presence of God within you. Feel into the guidance of God within you. What is the Spirit of God saying to you? What vision is being placed within your mind? Dear God, we join with people in this country and around the world in atoning in our hearts for how recklessly we have behaved, how irresponsible we have been towards the earth itself and towards life. Each of us takes responsibility for disengaging, for distracting ourselves. And we know that we are among millions and millions of people who want a great turning. But we get nervous, dear God, because we don't know exactly what that means and exactly what we are to do. But we no longer cower before our fear. We no longer are willing to shrink, play small, play weak, go ditzy. No, no more. We are willing to be men and women of strength and power and seriousness and joy. Lift us up, dear God, from the wreckage of our former self, from the ravages of our personal disasters. That we might learn so much from what we have been through, that we might be of even greater help. Use us. Guide us. Make us humble, yet strong. Soft, yet powerful. So loving that no fear has a place within our hearts. Make us good friends, good neighbors, good citizens, good lovers, good spouses. May the days of our littleness be over. The late days of our magnitude now begin. The days of our grandiosity behind us. The days of grandeur now upon us. Dear God, put your hand upon our nation and upon our world, that light might come from these apparent darknesses. Help the people of Houston. Help all those who suffer anywhere, for any reason, and bring forth through us a great and shining new dawn. And so it is. And together we all say, Amen.